While I'm still working for GE, I'm apprenticing for Matt at Vehement Knives. And then probably right after leaving GE, I did the first Kickstarter and started the brand Kopis Designs, let's say registered as an LLC with the government. Kopis Designs was birthed in, I think, 2016. Then I stayed in the industry for a while longer still.
Welcome back to another episode of Second Act Stories, where we profile people who have made surprising career changes and are now pursuing more rewarding lives in a second act. I'm your host today, Scott Merritt.
And I'm Andy Levine, today's co-host. One of the questions we often get from listeners is, how do you find your guests? So, Scott, I'm going to ask you, how did you find Jonathan Bahlatzis, who we're going to interview today?
So, it's an interesting story and a first for me, actually. Sometimes our guests submit their information through our nominate a guest box on our homepage. Other times, we just kind of run into them, and this is what happened with Jonathan. So I flew out to Denver to interview our recent guest, Ed Calderon. You might remember he was a former paramilitary anti-cartel agent. Well, Ed and I actually met at Jonathan's house, because Jonathan is one of Ed's associates, and they've actually collaborated quite a bit.
All right, let's get to what Jonathan does here and Kopis Designs that he runs.
Sure. So Jonathan is a former GE engineer who left that job to follow his passion of designing and making knives. And his company now is Kopis Designs. He left the safety of GE and is now running this company out of a shop from the back of his home. Thankfully, I didn't have to travel far to interview him because he came to Atlanta for the Blade Show, which is the biggest knife event in the industry.
I assume you weren't going to the Blade Show on your own. I certainly hope not.
I went to Jonathan's hotel. We had a nice visit in his hotel room, and here was the conversation. You make knives, but it's not just that you make knives. Tell me about it.
Right now, I design knives, I make knives, I run the manufacturing of knives and other products, and we also make a lot of multi-tools and tools that are just used in what we call everyday carry, so EDC. A lot of what we do is handmade customs. So these are knives that from beginning to end are all 100% touched by my hands or one of our helpers. And basically these are things that are custom craft made, things that you're going to pass on to the generations after you for years upon years.
Walk me through some of the different kinds of designs that you have.
Sure.
And who buys them?
I've always made knives that I would carry. And so that's kind of like the motto that we came up with years ago was always like form, fit, and function for everyday carry. But then I want to make something that makes you want to carry it. So it has to be visually and aesthetically pleasing, but most importantly, it has to be ergonomic to how it fits you, and it has to be purpose-built for what you're going to use it for. Some knives are great for camping. Some knives we make for specific self-defense applications where at-risk populations, man, woman, or other, might be in a situation where they need to defend themselves, and a lot of the knives we make are actually for that.
Do you consider yourself a manufacturer, a craftsman, an artist?
I would hope that I'm considered all three, but it took me a long time to actually consider myself an artist, really. So I've worked in manufacturing, and there are certain things that we as a company do manufacture. Most of the things that we have here this weekend right now at Blade Show are things that are handcrafted by me specifically. But the artist piece has taken me a while to embrace.
What's similar about what somebody what people would think of as an artist, a guy with a canvas and a palette and a brush. What's similar to what he does that you do, and what's different?
I think that for me, a traditional artist is creating something that is appreciated for the sheer beauty of viewing it, right? And a lot of what I do has to be very focused on not just how it looks, but even more focused on how it can be used, its durability, how long it's going to last. And so that part of it, sometimes in my mind, takes precedence over how it looks. It always takes precedence, really. But then at the end of the day, I'm trying to make something beautiful. And when I see how people appreciate it, those are the times that I actually feel like an artist. When someone picks something up who knows nothing about knives.
What is it that makes it appealing? So we know that there are people that collect knives and blades.
Yes, there are.
Right. So
you're in the capital of it right now.
Right. So we know that they're out there and we know why they're buying. But why is somebody else buying?
My mentor always told me an ass for every seat and a seat for every ass, right? So like I love to make handmade customs that take me days upon days to make and have every little detail cared for and will have every functionality you could possibly imagine. But for the average person who may not be a collector, I think you can get a very good knife, and you can get a very good knife from us for like $90. But then you can go into the high-end customs and be well over $1,000.
Jonathan was an engineer in his former career, which we'll cover later in the discussion, but I really wanted to hear more from him about how he started making knives.
I've always been the kind of person that like idle hands are the devil's plaything. So like if I'm not doing something, I'm probably not doing something good. So like after work, I needed something to be doing. And I basically just did a Google search and looked up custom knife makers in my area. And I found Vehement Knives, who was Matt Martin and Jenna Martin. And I just messaged them and said, hey, I know this is an old school request, but I'd be happy to come over and just sweep your floors if you let me watch you make custom knives. And they just sent back something simple like, hey, why don't you come over on Thursday and we'll see what happens. So after my day job at GE at the time, I went over there, had a beer, and they just never kicked me out. And turns out like I had a bit of a natural aptitude, and Matt was an excellent teacher, and so he was willing to put the time into me learning, and I was willing to put the time into investing in his company. And then I also was able to use some of my process engineering knowledge from my day job to kind of help streamline their business and help create business plans that help them become more efficient as an overall business themselves.
So you touched on your background in engineering. How did you wind up in engineering? Was that an interest of yours as a kid? Were you kind of book smart or really good at math?
Well, when we were very young, my parents were awesome about this, is they always had exchange students stay with us for the holidays. And most of the students were actually from RPI, Rensselaer Polytech in upstate New York. And so a lot of them were engineers. And I always remember looking up to them, and at the time I was also very technical. I used to take apart everything in the house to the dismay of my parents, where it'd basically be like, oh, now all of a sudden your stereo is pieces on the floor, and your toddler is trying to put it back together.
Yeah.
So according to my mom, I always wanted to be an engineer. I apparently said it when I was young because I admired all the people that would stay with us, but didn't quite know exactly what kind of engineer for the most part until later. And then I wouldn't say I was book smart. I was a problem child as far as schools go. But testing scores extremely high, top of the class in most things, like that type of thing, but also like suspended in detention a lot.
So you got out of high school, whatever. You went to college and you studied what?
Basically, I picked the school that gave me a full ride. So I applied to a whole bunch of Polytech institutes, basically because, like, the background with RPI and things. So, like, and Worcester Polytech outside of Boston was the one that offered me a full ride, and I was like, let's do this. So I started as a biochemical engineer. Shortly after, the school did away with that major. And based on kind of my personality, and I also had a really good mentor at the time and an advisor, he recommended that I do what was a new major. It's kind of a double major called, like, basically I started as a chemical engineer, and then you take all your core chemical engineering and then you switch and you start doing all of your, basically start of an MBA. So it's called chemical engineering and management engineering.
That was the degree that you graduated with?
The first time, then I got a master's later.
In what?
Supply chain management from Penn State.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Good
That
for
was
you.
the second one.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Once you graduated with your engineering degree, with a side helping of management,
Yeah.
where did you wind up working?
So once again, the same advisor was just a really influential person in that early part of my life. He told me that basically if I could get any job, the job for me would be to get into one of the leadership programs at General Electric. And the one I actually got into was called the OMLP, so it stands for Operations Management Leadership Program. It's a fast track program where they put you through 4 6-month rotations in different parts of a GE business, training you to be in operations management.
Talk to me about what the experience was working for GE.
Well, so the OMLP program is kind of more like trial by fire. So it's basically like they put you in positions that are uncomfortable for people that are very new in their careers to see how you do. And the ones that fare well and get rated well have their top choice of position after the 2 years on the program, their top choice of full-time career, right? If you are successful, it fast tracks you to high leadership positions. I was a lean leader, which is basically like an efficiency leader in a manufacturing plant. And a more senior gentleman was retiring as the weld leader. And when he was retiring, they said, John, we want you to supervise all activities in this area. Good luck. And I don't know anything about this.
Right.
I immediately realized that I was lacking in technical experience in welding. So I was running the 3 shifts, and the first thing I did was I requested to stay on 3rd shift, not as a supervisor, but as a learner, and be certified in all the weld certifications that I was learning. So I actually stayed, got burned, welded, was in the pits, doing MIG, TIG, stick, sub-arc, all the things, and I got my certs. And when I did that, and the people on the floor saw me doing that I wasn't just some stuck-up person in slacks come in and try and tell them how to do their job. That was the first time I started seeing actual success in leadership.
So it sounds like you figured out the path to success in the GE program, and you got your hands dirty, which probably surprised a lot of people. And so what was it about your approach?
This was in let's just say a rural part of America, that just had a very loyal, closed culture. So unless you were part of the group, it was very hard to get accepted. And it was also the culture of the shop. It's a dangerous place to work. You have to trust the people around you. And if they don't have the skills, it's hard to want to accept someone that you may not be safe around. So there were 10 years plus after this that all built upon kind of that singular experience, and then using that same skill of shut your mouth, which is the thing that I'm not very good at. You can probably tell from the podcast. So shut your mouth unless you're asking a question. And when you do ask a question, actively listen, write it down or whatever, take some notes, do something about it. Whether you're working in a manufacturing environment or later on in my career when I was managing 14 lead professional band project managers that are building power plants, that's the kind of thing that people value, is hearing what they say and actually doing something about it, not just being oh yeah, I heard you, but I'm not listening.
So you were at GE for how many years?
I think 11.
So 11 years in, you're rising through the ranks. You're recognized now for leadership, and you've been promoted, and you've got this comfortable career.
Yep.
And what happened?
So at that point, basically, I had the opportunity to take a promotion and move somewhere I didn't want to move or do something else. And after 11 years in GE, being a pretty senior member of most of the teams, honestly, I kind of felt like I had learned all I could get out of it.
So in the midst of all of this, you have an interest in...
Yeah, so throughout this time,
Matt.
Somewhere along the lines, while I'm still working for GE, I am apprenticing for Matt at Vehement Knives. And then probably right after leaving GE, I did the first Kickstarter and started the brand Kopis Designs, let's say registered as an LLC with the government. It was Kopis Designs, was birthed in, I think, 2016. Then I stayed in the industry for a while longer still.
But you've got this situation where you're working for a company that provides you benefits.
Yes.
That provides you a reliable salary, and you've got your own mouth to feed. You've got other mouths to feed. You've got a mortgage or rent payment. So how do you ultimately make the decision to say, I'm leaving all of that kind of comfort to then go full time into knife manufacturing?
So, I mean, for me, it's still a conversation that honestly I have pretty often with myself and with my closest friends and family. Like I'm still at a point in my transition that it's very new to me. So like all that we kind of went through basically happened throughout years. And then I actually didn't decide personally to be full-time until January of this year, 2023. So,
wow.
Yeah.
New.
But I had been running Kopis nights and weekends since 2016. And I'm not saying I would recommend this for everyone. For me, like you said, I was comfortable, had health insurance, had security, had all the things. But I wasn't happy. And like, this was something that a lot of people told me is just like, you may feel like you're stressed since you made this transition, but like you actually seem happier. Now the thing is more about the mental aspect of it. So for me, I kind of made a decision where basically I'm going to reevaluate in 2 months. And if I don't feel comfortable or I don't feel I'm ready, I'm going to go back to the day job, let's call it. Like go back to corporate America.
Right.
And then I said, okay, I'm going to do 2 more months. And then I said, I'm going to go to Blade Show and I'm going to reevaluate then. And so like, I mean, who knows? I could go back at some point if the job was perfect and it was for a company that like I respected and felt good about. But for the last 6 months, it's been pretty great. It feels stressful. I don't feel like I don't have that security and that safety net and backdrop, but I'm making knives and people are liking it, and that feels good.
Well, there's one thing. It's one thing to say you can make a knife now, right? So you hear this from your mentor. You can make a knife now. And then you do it and you prove him right. But then there's the other part of it, which is now you got to sell that knife.
And that's the advantage of what I was mentioning before is like, because of the fact that I started Kopis in 2016, I have a huge advantage over anyone that wants to just tomorrow make a transition into the knife making. So what I believe was actually very beneficial was I started an organic following with the Kickstarter, with my first customs in 2016. So that way, when I did go full time, I already have some baseline of people that appreciate that.
What's the biggest challenge you've faced since leaving corporate America and doing this full time?
I'm risk positive with, like when I had a day job, I would be happy to take risks with someone else's business and money. But when it comes to my personal life, like I'm a pretty like risk averse person when it comes to making sure that myself and my family are taken care of. And so like the stress of that, and then I'd say the biggest thing practically has been the balancing of time, because as of right now, like I have apprentices and I have family that helps me all the time and all that. But like I still am kind of a company of one at this point. And so managing the administrative stuff versus the actual making is probably the biggest day-to-day challenge for me.
What would you tell somebody who's sitting on the fence right now and going, you know what, I got this really comfortable situation over here and I've got my benefits and I've got my salary and I'd really like to do that, but I'm like they're just frozen and they can't leave the comfort of what they've got to pursue their passion?
Talk to a few people you trust and see what they say, and don't let them make the decision for you, but ask them for what their perception is of how you feel about it. You have to be honest with yourself, like, do I really want to even consider this decision? Because if I ask all my friends and they all say yes, but I still say no, I'm not going to do it, then I'm really the stopping point there, because I shouldn't have even asked them. And the second thing is look at like your happiness and what you think your happiness could be.
How much does that safety net of going back to corporate America nag at you?
I don't know. I don't even, honestly, so the thing for me is I don't really ever view things as a safety net. And that's kind of because like, I know I guess I could. And everyone always tells me like, you know, you can always do that. And I'm like, but you don't understand. It's difficult to get a job again. Like even if you know you can, you have the qualifications, you're better qualified at X, Y, and Z than X, Y, and Z people. it's still a pain in the ass to go and interview and to go through the processes and to get reacquainted with the company and go through negotiations and HR and onboarding. So like, it nags at me less every day.
All right, well, another great episode in the book, Scott. Thank you so much for finding Jonathan and bringing him to our listeners. I did have a couple of questions here. You got to see his entire product line, didn't you?
I did. So because Jonathan was in town for a major knife event, he had the entire product line with him. And when I met with him, it was prior to the event, and they had the entire line laid out across a hotel bed. And
you didn't try to lie down on the bed or anything, did you?
Well, I mean, I'm not I'm not a Vegas act. So I did get to see and handle a lot of the knives that Jonathan designs. And, you know, you'd be surprised. They're not like these crazy menacing knives that people might think about. They're actually really beautiful, and they're truly works of art, but functional works of art. And they all have, you know, different shapes and cuts and what have you, and they're all really carefully crafted for functional use as well as beauty.
In terms of his second act, the sense I got, and I'm just wondering if you can confirm this, is he didn't like quit GE one day and then try to start Kopis Designs the next day. It sounds like there was a big overlap in the middle there.
Yeah, so you, over 100 episodes, you kind of figured out that there are planners and leapers. And Jonathan is very much a planner, right? He's an engineer by nature and by trade. And engineering is a lot of planning, and Jonathan firmly fits in that category. He actually launched Kopis Designs while he was still at GE, and it was a Kickstarter campaign, and he built his following while he was still in the safety and comfort of that full-time job. But he also, you know, he found an apprenticeship with somebody who became his mentor, and he went out of his way to get all the experience he could, to learn everything that he could, and to make sure that he really knew what he was doing before he left GE and went full-time with Kopis.
For listeners who are interested in taking a look at his designs, tell us where they should go.
Sure. Kopis Designs, and it's spelled Kopis Designs, is all over social media. You can follow them on Instagram. They're really active there. They're pretty active on Facebook. Or you can look at their website at kopisdesigns.com.
All right. Well, thank you again. To our listeners, we hope you'll keep listening and subscribe to Second Act Stories on your favorite podcast app. Like us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn, and share us with your friends and family.
Absolutely. Stay tuned. There are more Second Act Stories just around the corner.